Chapter 1, The Other Side. The Discovery. The storm rattled the windows, but it was the whisper Nathan heard in the attic that made his breath catch. Nathan Graves stood at the base of the attic ladder, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. The storm outside was relentless, the wind howling like a chorus of unseen voices. He hated storms. They always brought back memories of his childhood, memories of losing his parents in a car wreck on a rain-slicked road. But this storm was different. This storm wasn't just outside. It felt like it had seeped into the bones of the old house, making the walls creak and moan, as if the house itself was alive. His grandmother's house had been his home since last year, after she passed away. He inherited it out of obligation rather than sentiment. The place was old and smelled faintly of mildew, but rent-free living was hard to pass up when you were scraping by on a part-time retail job. Tonight, however, the house felt less like a refuge and more like a trap. The whisper had been faint, almost imperceptible, but it drew him to the attic like a moth to a flame. Maybe it was just the wind slipping through the cracks, he told himself. Or maybe it was one of the rats he'd been too lazy to deal with. Either way, he needed to investigate. The last thing he needed was a leaky roof or a rodent infestation. The wooden ladder groaned under his weight as he climbed. Cobwebs hung thick in the corners, and the air was cold, carrying the distinct scent of old wood and forgotten things. As he stepped into the attic, the beam of his flashlight swept across stacks of boxes, a rocking chair draped with a dusty sheet, and an old chest tucked into the far corner. The Ouija board. Nathan hesitated before approaching the chest. It was an ornate thing, its surface carved with delicate patterns of vines and flowers. He didn't remember ever seeing it before, but then again, he hadn't explored much of the attic since moving in. With a reluctant sigh, he knelt beside it, brushing away the dust that coated its surface. The latch creaked as he opened it, and the smell of aged wood hit him like a wave. Inside, he found a collection of old photographs, a lace handkerchief, and beneath it all, a wooden board with letters, numbers, and the words yes, no, and goodbye etched into its surface. A Ouija board. Nathan chuckled softly, shaking his head. Seriously, Grandma? You were into this kind of thing? He picked up the board, turning it over in his hands. It was heavier than he expected, its surface smooth and polished. The planchette was tucked beneath it, its edges worn from use. He'd never believed in ghosts or spirits or anything remotely supernatural. In his mind, Ouija boards were just cheap parlor tricks designed to scare gullible teenagers. Still, there was something oddly compelling about it. Maybe it was the storm, or maybe it was the oppressive silence of the attic, but he felt an inexplicable urge to try it out. What harm could it do? The first session. Back in the living room, the storm continued to rage. Nathan set the board on the coffee table, lit a few candles for ambiance, and opened a bottle of whiskey to keep him company. He told himself this was just for fun, a way to kill time until the storm passed. Yet, as he placed his fingers on the planchette, a strange sense of anticipation settled over him. Is anyone there? He asked, his voice echoing slightly in the empty room. He felt ridiculous, like a kid playing make-believe. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, his skepticism began to waver. The planchette didn't move, of course, but the room felt different. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it was as if the air had thickened, pressing down on him like an invisible weight. He tried again. If there's anyone here, give me a sign. Nothing. Nathan sighed, leaning back on the couch. He was about to pack it up and call it a night when the planchette shifted ever so slightly beneath his fingers. His breath caught. He stared at the board, half expecting it to move again, but it remained still. Maybe it was just a trick of his imagination, or the whiskey, but then it moved again. The first message. Nathan's heart pounded as the planchette slowly slid across the board. He wasn't pushing it, at least he didn't think he was. It stopped on yes. Okay, he said, his voice trembling slightly. You've got my attention. Who are you? The planchette moved again, spelling out a single letter. E. E? That's it? Just E? The planchette darted to yes. Nathan chuckled nervously, running a hand through his hair. All right, E. What do you want? The response was immediate. Help. A chill ran down Nathan's spine. He glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, but he was alone. Of course he was alone. This was just a game, right? "How can I help you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The planchette moved slowly, almost hesitantly, as if the entity was struggling to communicate. It spelled out two words: be ready. Ready for what? This time the answer came quickly. Darkness. Eerie encounters. For the rest of the night, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker, deeper, as if they were alive. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the windows made his nerves fray further. He tried to sleep, but his dreams were plagued by strange, fragmented images. A barren wasteland, a sky choked with ash, and a figure standing in the distance, watching him. When he woke the next morning, the Ouija board was still on the coffee table, the planchette resting on the word goodbye. The obsession begins. Nathan told himself it was just a fluke, a strange coincidence fueled by whiskey and an overactive imagination. But deep down, he felt a nagging curiosity and something else: fear. He couldn't stop thinking about the board, about the entity that called itself E. Who or what was it? And what did it mean by darkness? As the days passed, Nathan found himself drawn back to the board, unable to resist the pull of the mystery it presented. He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change forever, and the darkness was closer than he could have ever imagined. Chapter 2, The Shadow of Tomorrow. The pull of the board. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was worse. It wasn't just the lack of sound. It was the absence of life, of motion. The air in the house felt stagnant, heavy, as though the storm had taken something with it when it left. Nathan sat on the couch staring at the Ouija board on the coffee table. It had been 3 days since his first session, and he hadn't touched it since, but he thought about it constantly. The word darkness echoed in his mind like a whisper trapped in a loop. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the planchette sliding across the board, spelling out cryptic messages. He told himself it was just a game, a harmless distraction. But the truth was, he felt something he couldn't explain. It wasn't fear exactly, though. That was part of it. It was curiosity, a pull he couldn't resist. On the fourth night he gave in, Nathan lit the candles again, poured himself another glass of whiskey, and placed his fingers on the planchette. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "E," he said softly, "are you there?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly the planchette began to move. It slid across to the board with an almost deliberate slowness, stopping on yes. Nathan's heart raced. "Okay," he said, swallowing hard. "Let's talk." The messages grow darker. Over the next hour, Nathan asked question after question, and Eve responded. The entity's answers were cryptic, often fragmented, but they all seemed to point to the same thing. Something was coming. Something terrible. Darkness. It spelled out again and again. Be ready. What kind of darkness? Nathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Death. Fire. Silence. The words sent a chill down his spine. He tried to press for more details, but E's responses grew more erratic, almost frantic. The planchette moved faster, spelling out warnings that made less and less sense. Don't trust them. Who? Nathan demanded. Who shouldn't I trust? The others. What others? What are you talking about? The planchette stopped moving. Nathan waited, his breath held, but the board remained still. The silence that followed was deafening. The descent into obsession. Nathan became consumed by the board. Every night he returned to it, seeking answers, desperate to make sense of the cryptic warnings. The messages became more frequent, more urgent. E began giving him instructions, small, seemingly inconsequential tasks at first. Buy canned food. Fill the bathtub with water. Lock the doors. Nathan followed the instructions without question. He told himself it was just a precaution, a way to ease the growing sense of unease that gnawed at him. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He was starting to believe. His behavior didn't go unnoticed. At work, his coworkers commented on how distracted he seemed. His manager pulled him aside one afternoon and asked if everything was okay. Nathan brushed it off, blaming stress and a lack of sleep. But the truth was, he couldn't sleep. Not anymore. Every time he closed his eyes, he dreamed of a world in ruins, buildings reduced to rubble, the sky black with smoke, and the air filled with the smell of ash and decay. The dreams felt so real, so vivid, that he woke up gasping for breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He began to wonder if they were dreams at all, or if they were something else. Warnings, visions, strange events. The more Nathan used the board, the stranger things became. It started with small, almost imperceptible changes. Objects in his house seemed to move on their own. His keys weren't where he'd left them, the TV turned on by itself, and a glass he'd left on the counter shattered without warning. One night, as he sat with the board, he felt a sudden chill. The candles flickered, their flames shrinking to almost nothing before flaring back to life. The planchette moved on its own, faster than it ever had before. It spelled out a single word: run. Nathan froze, his fingers hovering above the board. Run from what? He asked, his voice shaking. But the planchette didn't move again. The candles flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. That night he slept with the lights on. The figure in the shadows. As the days turned into weeks, Nathan began to notice something or someone watching him. It started as a feeling, a prickle on the back of his neck, like the sensation of being stared at in a crowded room. But it grew stronger, more tangible. He saw shadows moving in the corners of his vision, heard faint whispers that stopped the moment he turned his head. One night, as he was walking home from the store, he saw a figure standing across the street. It was tall and thin, its face obscured by the shadows. Nathan stopped, his breath hitching in his throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching him. "Hello?" Nathan called out, his voice trembling. "Who's there?" The figure stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. Breaking point. Nathan's paranoia reached its peak when he came home to find the Ouija board that he already set up on the coffee table. He was certain he'd put it away the night before, but there it was, the planchette resting on the word yes. He stared at it, his chest tight with fear. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. The planchette moved, spelling out, "Be ready." "For what?" Nathan demanded. "What's coming?" The planchette stopped. Then slowly it spelled out, "Me." Nathan's blood ran cold. He grabbed the board and threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a loud crack, the planchette skittering across the floor. But even as it lay in pieces, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Whatever was happening, whatever was coming, it wasn't over. A glimpse of the future. That night, Nathan had the most vivid dream yet. He stood in the middle of a desolate wasteland, the sky above him a swirling mass of black clouds. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning flesh. In the distance, he saw a figure standing atop a hill, its silhouette sharp against the fiery sky. The figure raised a hand, beckoning him. Nathan felt an inexplicable pull, as though invisible strings were dragging him forward. He climbed the hill, his heart pounding with each step. When he reached the top, the figure turned to face him. Nathan gasped, his blood running cold. The figure wasn't a stranger. It was him. The dream ended with Nathan jolting awake, his body drenched in sweat. The words "be ready" echoed in his mind over and over like a mantra. He didn't sleep again that night. Chapter 3, The Future Speaks. The breaking mind. The morning light filtered through the curtains, but Nathan felt no relief in the warmth it cast. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the broken Ouija board on the counter. What had started as a game, a little distraction to pass the time, had consumed his life. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept through the night or gone a full day without thinking about the board or the warnings. His journal sat open in front of him, pages filled with frantic scrawls. Every message from E was documented, analyzed, and cross-referenced, yet none of it made sense. The words were like puzzle pieces from different boxes, fragments of a picture he couldn't see. But one thing was clear. Something was coming, and he was at the center of it. Nathan ran a hand through his unkempt hair, his fingers trembling. He hadn't left the house in days. The groceries he'd bought last week were running low, but the thought of going outside filled him with dread. He felt safe here, or at least safer than he would be out there. Out there, the shadows moved. Out there, the whispers followed him. As he sat in the silence of his kitchen, he heard it again. The faint, familiar sound of the planchette sliding across the board. His blood ran cold. Slowly, he turned his head toward the living room. The board was still in pieces on the floor, but the planchette was moving. The revelation begins. Nathan's legs felt like lead as he approached the coffee table. The planchette moved with purpose, dragging itself across the shattered surface of the board. It paused, then spelled out a single word. Fix. Fix what? Nathan whispered, his voice barely audible. The planchette didn't respond. Instead, it slid to the edge of the board and stopped, as if waiting for him to act. Nathan hesitated, his mind racing. He didn't want to touch it, didn't want to acknowledge it. But the pull was irresistible. Against his better judgment, he knelt on the floor and began piecing the board back together. The wood was cracked and splintered, but the pieces fit together well enough. When he was finished, he placed the planchette in the center and stared at it, his heart pounding. The room felt heavy, the air thick with an unseen presence. Okay, he said, his voice shaking. It's fixed. What now? The planchette moved immediately, faster than it ever had before. It spelled out, ask. Nathan swallowed hard. He didn't want to ask, he didn't want to know, but the words came tumbling out of him anyway. Who are you? What do you want from me? The response was immediate. You. Nathan froze, his mind struggling to process the answer. Me? What do you mean, me? Who are you? The planchette moved again, spelling out a single letter, E. I know that, Nathan snapped, his frustration boiling over. But who are you? What are you? The planchette paused as if the entity was considering its response. Then it began to move, slowly, deliberately, spelling out words that made Nathan's blood turn to ice. I am you. Nathan stared at the board, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. No, he whispered, shaking his head. That's not possible. The planchette moved again. I am you, future. Nathan stumbled back, his mind reeling. He wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as some elaborate prank or a trick of his imagination. But deep down, he knew it was true. The dreams, the warnings, the sense of familiarity he felt every time he spoke to E, it all made sense now. Why, he asked, his voice breaking, why are you doing this? The planchette moved quickly, almost angrily. To save you. The future unveiled. Nathan spent hours at the board, asking questions, demanding answers. Future Nathan, the entity he now referred to as E, explained everything. The darkness, the destruction, the apocalypse. It was all real. It was coming and it was inevitable. But there was a way to survive, a way to prepare. E gave him a list of instructions, each more bizarre than the premises. Stockpile food and water, build a shelter. Trust no one. The messages were fragmented, disjointed, but they all pointed to the same conclusion. Nathan was running out of time. Why me? He asked. Why are you only talking to me? Why not warn everyone? The planchette spelled out, no one else will listen. Nathan couldn't argue with that. He barely believed it himself, and he was living it. But the more he thought about it, the more questions he had. If E was really his future self, why couldn't he be more specific? Why couldn't he tell him exactly what was going to happen or when? Why can't you just tell me everything? Nathan demanded. The response was chilling. Knowing too much will destroy you. The paranoia grows. Nathan followed E's instructions to the letter. He began stockpiling supplies, barricading windows, and fortifying the basement. He quit his job, telling his manager he needed time to figure things out. His coworkers whispered behind his back, calling him paranoid, unhinged. He didn't care. They didn't understand. They couldn't. But as the days turned into weeks, Nathan's paranoia grew. He began to question everything, his memories, his thoughts, even his own reflection in the mirror. Was E telling the truth, or was he being manipulated? Was the apocalypse real, or was he losing his mind? He started seeing the figure in the shadows more frequently. It appeared in the corners of his vision, always just out of reach. Sometimes it looked like a stranger, tall and faceless. Other times it looked like him. One night he confronted it. "Who are you?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty house. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. It simply stared at him, its eyes, his eyes, burning with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Then it disappeared, leaving him alone in the suffocating silence. The final warning. E's messages became more urgent, more frantic. "Time is running out," the board spelled out one night. "You must be ready." "For what?" Nathan shouted. "What's going to happen?" The planchette moved so quickly it almost flew off the board. "Fire! Death! Silence!" Nathan slammed his fists on the table, his frustration boiling over. "That doesn't tell me anything. Just tell me what to do." The planchette went still. For a moment, Nathan thought he had scared E away. But then it moved again, slowly, deliberately, spelling out a final message that sent a chill down his spine. "Do not trust them. They are coming." The unraveling. Nathan sat alone in the dark, the words "they are coming" echoing in his mind. He didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but he knew one thing. They were coming for him. As the clock struck midnight, he heard a knock at the door. His heart stopped. He stared at the door, his mind racing. No one ever came to his house, especially not at this hour. The knock came again, louder this time. Nathan grabbed a knife from the kitchen and approached the door, his hands shaking. "Who's there?" he called out. No answer. He opened the door a crack, peering into the darkness. The street was empty, the night silent. But as he closed the door, he saw it. A figure standing at the end of the driveway, watching him. It was him. Chapter 4, The End of Everything. The First Signs. Nathan's heart pounded as he slammed the door shut and locked it. His hands trembled as he backed away, his eyes fixed on the shadowy figure at the end of the driveway. It didn't move. It didn't even flinch. It just stood there, a perfect silhouette of himself, staring back at him. "What do you want?" Nathan whispered, his voice barely audible. The figure didn't respond. It didn't need to. Deep down, he already knew the answer. The figure was gone when he checked again, but the unease it left behind lingered. Nathan stayed up all night, pacing the house, clutching the knife he'd taken from the kitchen. He kept expecting the door to burst open for someone, or something, to come for him. But the hours passed in silence, the tension building with each tick of the clock. When dawn finally broke, Nathan looked outside and saw the first signs of the apocalypse E had warned him about. The sky was a sickly orange, the sun obscured by thick clouds of smoke. The air smelled of ash and decay, and the streets were eerily empty. It was as if the world had been abandoned overnight. He turned on the TV, desperate for answers, but the news was nothing but chaos. Footage of cities in flames, people screaming, streets littered with debris. The broadcasts were erratic, the anchors visibly shaken. "We don't know the full extent of what's happening," one of them said, her voice trembling. "But we urge everyone to stay indoors and stay safe." Nathan turned off the TV and stared at the blank screen. He didn't need the news to tell him what was happening. He already knew. The chaos outside. The next few days were a blur of fear and confusion. The world outside descended into madness. Fires burned unchecked, the sky grew darker, and the air became harder to breathe. Nathan stayed inside, following E's instructions to the letter. He rationed his food and water, barricaded the doors and windows, and avoided contact with anyone. But even inside, he wasn't safe. Strange things began to happen, stranger than anything he'd experienced before. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling the house with a cacophony of voices. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut without warning, and the shadows seemed to take on a life of their own. Nathan tried to ignore it, to focus on survival, but the constant noise and movement wore him down. He felt like he was being watched, like something unseen was lurking just beyond his field of vision. And the worst part was, he couldn't tell if it was real or if he was losing his mind. The confrontation. On the fifth night, the whispers stopped. The house fell silent, the kind of silence that presses down on you, that makes you feel like you're suffocating. Nathan sat in the living room, his knife in one hand and the Ouija board in the other. He hadn't touched the board since the night it told him, "They are coming." Now he placed it on the coffee table and lit a single candle. His hands shook as he set the planchette in the center and placed his fingers on it. "E," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you there?" The planchette moved immediately, sliding to yes. "What's happening?" Nathan asked. Is this the end?" The planchette moved quickly, spelling out, yes. Nathan swallowed hard, his throat dry. What do I do? Follow. Follow who? Nathan demanded. You, the others? Who am I supposed to follow? The planchette stopped, then slowly spelled out, me, the journey into darkness. Nathan didn't understand what he meant until the knock came, a loud, deliberate knock that echoed through the house. He froze, his heart racing. He didn't want to answer it. He didn't want to know who or what was on the other side, but he couldn't ignore it. Slowly, he stood and made his way to the door, the knife clutched tightly in his hand. He opened it, and there he was, his future self, the man he'd seen in his dreams, the figure that had been haunting him for weeks. Come with me, future Nathan said. His voice was calm, almost soothing, but his eyes were cold and empty. Nathan hesitated. Why, where are we going? To survive, future Nathan replied. You've been preparing for this. Now it's time. Nathan wanted to refuse, to slam the door and lock it, but something about future Nathan's presence was magnetic. He felt an inexplicable pull, as if he had no choice but to follow. The truth revealed. Future Nathan led him through the desolate streets, past burning buildings and abandoned cars. The air was thick with smoke, making it hard to breathe. The whispers followed them, growing louder with every step. Where are we going? Nathan asked, his voice hoarse. To the source, future Nathan replied, to the place where it all began. They walked for what felt like hours, the landscape around them growing more surreal with each passing moment. The sky turned black, the ground cracked and smoldered, and the air vibrated with an otherworldly hum. Nathan felt like he was walking through a nightmare. Finally, they arrived at a massive, gaping hole in the ground. The edges were jagged, the pit descending into infinite darkness. Nathan stared at it, his stomach twisting with fear. What is this? He asked. Future Nathan turned to him, his expression unreadable. It's the end, and the beginning. Nathan shook his head. I don't understand. You will, future Nathan said, but first you have to make a choice. The final choice. Future Nathan explained that the apocalypse wasn't a natural disaster or an act of God. It was a loop, a cycle that repeated over and over. And Nathan was at the center of it. Every version of him had tried to stop it, to change the future, but they had all failed. Now it was his turn. You can end it, future Nathan said, but it will cost you everything. What do you mean? Nathan asked, his voice trembling. You have to go into the pit, future Nathan said. You have to sacrifice yourself to break the cycle. Nathan stared at the pit, his mind racing. He didn't want to believe it, but deep down he knew it was true. He could feel the pull of the darkness, the weight of the choice he had to make. What happens if I don't? He asked. Future Nathan's expression darkened. The cycle begins again, and the world burns. The leap. Nathan stood at the edge of the pit, his heart pounding. The whispers were deafening now, telling him to jump, to run, to fight, to surrender. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made his choice. He jumped. The echo of tomorrow. Nathan awoke in his living room, the Ouija board on the coffee table in front of him. The storm raged outside, just as it had the first night he used the board. For a moment, he thought it had all been a dream. But then he saw the scar on his arm, the same scar future Nathan had shown him. The whispers were gone, the shadows still. But Nathan knew it wasn't over. The cycle had been broken, but at what cost? And as he stared at the board, he couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was still watching, waiting. Be ready, he whispered to himself. It's not over. This concludes our audiobook. Please like and subscribe for more captivating stories.